And we're in the middle of Igeres HaKodesh Yud. Igeres HaKodesh Yud begins by talking about Gvura. Oiz and Gvura. Right? That in order for Yiddishkeit to come down to us, there's a necessity for it to be a inyan from Medida V'Agbola. Through this Gvura, the godliness comes into the world. In other words, infinity can't come into the world. Infinity has no connection to anything that's limited and real, in our sense of the word real. And therefore, in order for godliness to come into the world, there has to be a tzimtzum. And we mentioned and we learned that there's the tzimtzum of creation, and there's the tzimtzum of Yiddishkeit. And there's a very big difference between the tzimtzum of creation and the tzimtzum of Yiddishkeit. The tzimtzum of creation, is less. The tzimtzum of Yiddishkeit is a concentration of the atmos of Elokus. How Elokus is concentrated into an atmos. But the emes is that in this Igeres HaKodesh, he doesn't talk about the idea that godliness is a tzimtzum where the whole atmos is mitzumtzum. But he says it's the idea of the tzimtzum of godliness into the Ramach Kelim. Each mitzvah corresponds to a different Eiver of Adam Ha'elyon. Each mitzvah is Mamshech Oyer Ein Sof, the different limb of Adam Ha'elyon, and to them to Adam Ha'tachten. And in order to affect this, mitzvahs have to be B'medida V'Agbola. This is the basic message. This concept that for godliness to come into the world has to be limited is called Chesed Olam. Kindness that has to do with Olam. On the one hand, it's Chesed, it's Gili Elokus, like the Alter Rebbe says in the very beginning. Chasdei Hashem HaMechunim B'Shem Yamin. But since this Chesed is coming into the world, it's called Chesed Olam. How Chesed has to do with Yamin, with the right hand. So the Rebbe now begins on Daf Kuf Tezvav and Aleph, 8 lines from the bottom. And of course, you can guess yourself what he's going to do right now. Sometimes you don't have godliness and even of Chesed Gvura, which is called Chesed Olam. Sometimes like you have to reveal the godliness as it's truly infinite. And this would be called not Chesed Olam. This would be called, what's the opposite of Chesed Olam? This would be called Chesed Havaya, an infinite Chesed of the Eibishter. Okay, and of course you'll learn when there's a necessity for Chesed Havaya. He says like this: however, this idea, that the idea of bringing godliness into the world, since it's coming into the world, it has to have a certain Medida V'Agbola so that godliness can be Nimshach and Ephraim of Pnimius through the Kelim of Atzilus. It's only for a Yid who does mitzvahs. He hasn't turned away from mitzvahs to the right or to the left, even a hair's width. However, an individual who's crossed over the path, God forbid. In other words, he's done Avedas. Because he affected that his road should be mu'uva, that means crooked. Law says to affect a diminution in the supernal holiness. In other words, by not doing what he's supposed to, either by missing mitzvahs and by what's worse, by doing leisa said. It affects that there's a giroy in lamailo, not just lamato. Shagora erke. He affected a diminution in the measure of bechinas hamshachasi, what he could have drawn down. That what he could have affected in bringing down through his Yiddishkeit. From the godliness of the Eibishter. And the radiation of the divine light from Ein Sof. If he would guard the Torah and do the mitzvahs like the halacha requires, and he missed that opportunity, this is considered a mu'uvas, a crookedness, a krumkeit, which is irreparable. Now you know where the lashon mu'uvas liyuchal appears. Huh? Where does it appear? Huh? By Gemara Chagiga. Yeah, but in Tanya it's in Perek Zayin. The last words of Perek Zayin in Tanya is Ze'abala Erev Ve'heled Mamzer. The Gemara brings 2 examples of a mu'uvas shilchal sakin. Laisa said is Heled Mamzer. Heled Mamzer is very close to Chilul Hashem. You brought something into the Gashmizik world. It's too late. The person saw you do an Aved and it affected Chilul Hashem. It's not going to help you. You're going to do tshuva now till the cows come home. That person has a negative effect, image of the Eibishter and the Velakus. So if Chilul Hashem, Mamzer, it's the same kind of thing. The Mamzer's walking around. The other example is if you didn't do a mitzvah saseh shaz man groma. The time is gone. Chasa yema chada, chasa levusha lechada. Here the Alter Rebbe is saying mu'uvas liyuchal sakin about every mitzvah. You could have brought down light, even a mitzvah is not zman groma, like Talmud Torah or like tzedakah or like I don't know what mezuzah, whatever the mitzvah is. You missed an opportunity to do a mitzvah. So though mitzad the nigla of zman groma, you didn't lose a zman, but you wasted an opportunity of bringing godliness down. So this is a Giroi. Huh?
The Torah you did, because Talmud Torah is a constant thing. So
It depends on your chiyuv of Talmud Torah. In other words, if you don't do your shir of Talmud Torah, which is very different from individual to individual, you're able on the Isser Esser. And the Gemara says,
someone knows shir.
speaks to his local rabbi and then he adds 50% of what he tells him.
Okay.
Says the Alter Rebbe, therefore, it was a giroya. There was a diminution. You missed an opportunity. How do you fix it? This you have to have what the Alter Rebbe calls chesed havaya, which is higher than chesed elul. Kiyim, the answer is, bring it down a supernal light, which is higher than the world. That, it's not revealing itself in a limited way in the world, because it's taka infinite. It's not how godliness is simtsum into the kelim of atilos, but how godliness is above limitation. Hanikra chesed ilah is called the higher chesed, which because it means the chesed of chesed. It's also called v'rav chesed, as I'm sure you know. Rav chesed is one of the Gimel Midas harachamim, right? V'rav chesed ve'emes, it's the sixth midah according to the Arizal. And v'rav chesed means infinite chesed, and this is mesak in the bu'uvis. When your mamshach chesed avaya, which is bli gavul, and it's not coming from did bala, it fixes the mistake. Why? The fisher may, you know, mispashet, it shines and it expands, but in an infinite way, bli gavul and without any measure, without any limit, any measure. Because it's not contracted into the world. In other words, it's not the way godliness normally comes down, which is through tzimtzum and gvuras, which is called chesed elam. In this case, it's not tzimtzum, it's bli gavul, which is called chesed avaya. Ella, instead, it's makef aleim al mailas, hidden from them above, mereish kol dargin, atzevachuli, from the highest level to the lowest level. And therefore, when a person does something to bring down chesed ilah, rav chesed, which he's soon going to call chesed havaya, down here into this world. So when you have an arousal from below to do an act, which is mamshech chesed havaya, so then oid elyon zeh, this infinite light, which is called chesed havaya, is meir u'mispashet, it radiates and it expands teich elamas into the world. U'misaken kol ma'uvas, and it corrects all chesreinis, v'chol megrois, and all diminutions, lessenings, shenitnu b'kedesh elam, which were affected, and were given into kedesh elam, which goes on chochma and atzilos b'chlal. Because since your mamshach eidin tov, which is higher than atzilos, this is what we call kachashecha ka'eda, u'machadesh oida, and it renews the light with tuvin, and they're good. But yes, it's eis with more weight and more power. The beginning is chodesh mamish, a level which is called chodesh, a madrega of which is called chodesh. In Chassidus, what's chodesh? Chodesh doesn't mean a higher light. Chodesh means you take a madrega of which is a yin von helem, and you make it into gilui. You mechadash a new gilui. And this is the aveda of about tshuva. Chein Amru, which is why the Gemara suggests in the Rambam Baskins, the B'malkam Shbal Tshuva Eimdin V'chulu, the Bal Tshuva, where the Bal Tshuva stands, the Tzaddigama cannot stand, because he's mamshach rav chesed. Shay, you understand? So the Alter Rebbe is saying normally there's chesed oilam, and when you need it, there's chesed avaya.